The boy was holding a kitchen knife. Not a butter knife. Not a plastic toy knife. A real 12-inch chef's knife from the most expensive kitchen in Busan, and he was pointing it directly at the woman who had just introduced herself as his new caregiver. She lasted 4 minutes. 4 minutes from the moment she walked through the iron gates of the Kwan estate to the moment she was screaming down the driveway in her own car, luggage still inside, dignity somewhere on the marble floor behind her. That was nanny number 30. And somewhere in the east wing of that fortress they called a home, a 4-year-old boy named Kwan Saiwa sat in the ruins of another ruined introduction, surrounded by scattered toys and torn cushions, his dark eyes flat and unreadable. He didn't smile. He didn't cry. He just stared at the wall. He hadn't spoken a single word in 14 months. And every single person who had tried to change that had failed. Until a stranger from Lagos walked through his door and did the one thing nobody else had thought to do. She didn't try to fix him. She just stayed. They said Kwan Saiwu was impossible. That was the word that moved through the staffing agencies of Busan like a warning whispered between professionals. Impossible. Some said it with pity. Others said it with something sharper. The wounded pride of trained caregivers who had been outsmarted, exhausted, and defeated by a child who barely reached their hip. 30 caregivers in 14 months. The first 3 had been gentle, soft-spoken women who came with glowing references and warm smiles and the absolute certainty that they could reach him. They couldn't. One lasted 9 days before she submitted her resignation letter from a hotel 2 districts away, where she had checked herself in after Saiwu released her carefully organized belongings from the 3rd floor window one item at a time. Shoes first, then her travel umbrella, then her phone charger, still plugged into the wall, which meant he had first unplugged it and then carried it to the window specifically. Methodical. That was what made people the most uneasy. Kwan Saiwu wasn't chaotic in the way troubled children often were. He was precise, deliberate, as if every act of destruction had been considered in advance, approved by some internal committee, and executed with the careful focus of someone twice his age. Nanny number 7 had tried a reward system. Charts, stickers, small prizes for good behavior. Saiwu had studied the system for 2 days with quiet interest. Then on the 3rd morning, he had gathered every sticker, every chart, every small prize, and deposited them neatly in the trash bin outside her bedroom door. He hadn't made a mess. He hadn't thrown anything. He had simply looked her in the eye, pointed at the bin, and walked away. She quit that afternoon. Number 12 had lasted the longest, 3 weeks, before the incident with the koi pond. Nobody talked about the koi pond anymore. The gardener still flinched when anyone walked past it. Number 19 had been a retired child behavior specialist who had written 2 books on managing difficult toddlers. She submitted not just a resignation but a 17-page report concluding that Kwan Saiwu presented a case beyond her professional scope. She wished the family well. She did not leave her contact details. And through all of it, through 30 caregivers and 17 months of chaos and silence and small precise acts of war, Kwan Saiwa's father watched from a distance and felt the particular helplessness of a man who had never once in his adult life been powerless. Kwan Jae-ho was not a man people crossed. In Busan's underworld, his name moved differently than other names. It didn't inspire the hot, immediate fear of someone violent and unpredictable. It inspired the colder, more enduring fear of someone who was always several steps ahead, who already knew what you were going to do before you did it, who had already arranged the consequences before you even made the mistake. He had built an empire that operated in the gray spaces between legitimate business and things that were never discussed in polite company. He had sat across from men who had tried to intimidate, bribe, threaten, and destroy him, and he had outlasted every single one of them. He was 41 years old. He had a dragon tattoo that coiled from his left collarbone up the side of his neck, its head resting just below his jaw, not hidden, not covered, worn like a signature. In boardrooms, it made people nervous. In certain other rooms, it made people leave. He was, by any measurable standard, a man who got what he wanted. Except with his son. Kwan Saiwu had arrived in the world on a rainy Thursday in May, and from that first night, Jae-ho had understood something nobody had ever told him, that there was a version of love that had no strategy, no leverage, no exit plan. That there was something that could get inside the walls of a man who had spent 20 years making himself impenetrable. For 3 years, his son had been the only thing in the world he was completely unguarded around. Then Saiwa's mother died. Her name had been Park Hyojin. She was 31 when she died, and she had been the only person in Jaeho's world who had never once been afraid of him. Not on the day they met, not on the day she found out exactly what kind of man he was, not in the years that followed. She had looked at the tattoo on his neck and the coldness in his professional life and the walls he'd built around himself, and she had simply decided none of it was who he actually was. She'd been right. He had never forgiven her for being right, and he had loved her ferociously for it. The cancer came quickly. That was what everyone said afterward, as if the speed made it more bearable. It came so quickly, there was nothing anyone could do, but quickly still meant 8 months of watching someone you love become someone you don't recognize, and then watching them become no one at all. Hyojin had died on a Tuesday. Saiwa had been 2 years and 8 months old. Old enough to understand that Mama was gone. Too young to understand why. Too young to have any of the tools that adults pretend help with grief, language, context, the ability to tell yourself that time will pass and things will get easier. He had simply gone quiet. Not gradually. Not in stages. On the Wednesday after his mother died, Kwon Saiwoo stopped speaking. He stopped responding to his name. He stopped engaging with the staff, with his grandmother, with the world. He moved through the house like a small ghost, present and visible and entirely unreachable. The doctors had a name for it. Trauma-induced selective mutism, compounded by acute grief response. They had recommendations. Structure, patience, professional support, consistency. What followed was 30 caregivers in 14 months. Jaeho had tried. He had hired the best people the agencies had. He had paid triple the going rate. He had read the reports, attended the briefings, followed the advice of every specialist who came through the door. He had done everything except the one thing that actually mattered. He had not been present. Because every time he looked at his son's face, he saw Hyojin looking back at him, and the weight of that was something he had not yet found a way to carry. So he worked. He worked 16-hour days and flew to meetings in Seoul and Tokyo, and kept building the empire that was supposed to mean something, and in the east wing of his fortress on the hill above Busan, his son sat in silence and drove away everyone who tried to reach him. Until the night Jaeho's mother called. "I found someone," she said. No greeting. No preamble. Kwon Hae-suk had not changed her communication style in 40 years. Someone. Jaeho repeated the word back at her like it might mean something different the second time. A young woman. She was recommended by a professor at Yonsei through a colleague of mine. She has a graduate degree in child trauma therapy. She's worked in Nigeria, the UK, and here. She knows grief, Jaeho. Not from textbooks. 30 people have known grief. Or claimed to. This one lived it. A pause. She lost her father young. She stopped speaking too for a while. And then someone reached her. Jaeho was quiet. Her name is Chioma Johnson. She's 26. Nigerian. She's been in Korea for 3 years. Another long silence. People will have opinions, he said finally. People always have opinions, his mother said. Saiwa hasn't laughed in 14 months. Their opinions can wait. He stared at the ceiling of his study, at the painting Hyojin had chosen, the one he'd never been able to take down. Send me her information. I already sent you the contract draft. You're meeting her Thursday. Don't wear the neck tattoo to intimidate her. Wear a collar. I don't own a... She had already hung up. Chioma Johnson had a rule. She did not cry over rejection emails. She had made this rule on the day the 23rd rejection landed in her inbox, and she had broken it twice since then, which by her count was a fairly respectable record given that she was now staring at rejection number 31. We appreciate your interest, and will keep your CV on file for future opportunities. They would not keep her CV on file for future opportunities. She had been in Korea long enough to understand what that sentence meant. It meant, we saw your photograph in the video interview, we noticed your name, we made a decision that had nothing to do with your qualifications, and we would like to end this interaction as politely as possible. She closed the laptop. Her room in the shared apartment in Dihangno was small, but she had made it hers. Her grandmother's Ankara print pinned above the desk. Her collection of dog-eared psychology texts stacked in order of importance. The small potted plant on the windowsill that had somehow survived 3 Korean winters, and Chioma's occasionally forgetting to water it. Resilience, she thought, looking at the plant. We do what we must. She had a master's degree in childhood trauma and developmental psychology from the University of Lagos, top of her cohort. She had field placement hours in 3 countries. She had research published in 2 peer-reviewed journals. She had worked crisis intervention with children in conflict zones before she was 24. And she could not get hired in Seoul, or Busan, or anywhere in between. Her visa depended on employment. She had 6 weeks. Her phone rang. It was her mother. Chioma, have you eaten? Yes, Mama. Have you eaten well? Not that noodle thing. Mama. Your Auntie Ngozi's son is coming to Lagos next month. Very successful. Imports and exports. I'm just saying. I have to go, Mama. She hung up and immediately received a text from her roommate, Jia, who was in the living room 12 feet away. Asterisk, check the Yonsei alumni board. Someone posted a job. Child specialist. Busan. The pay is insane. Asterisk. Chioma walked out to find Jia sitting cross-legged on the sofa, eyes wide, phone extended like an offering. She read the posting. Asterisk, seeking a child psychology specialist for live-in placement. Single-parent household, Busan. Male child, age 4, experiencing trauma-related communication withdrawal. 14 months, without verbal communication. Previous caregivers, 30. Compensation, 18 million KRW monthly, full housing, healthcare, meals. Serious inquiries only. Referred through Professor Kwanmasuk, Yonsei, asterisk. Chioma read it twice. Then again. 30 previous caregivers, she said. I know. That's not normal turnover. That's either severe institutional failure or a child in genuine crisis. Or both. Definitely both. She handed the phone back. What family? Jia pulled up a name. Chioma's eyes went still.
Kwan.
As in Kwon Jae-ho. The silence that followed was informative.
Jia.
I know. Kwon Jae-ho is. I know what he is. Chioma sat down slowly. Kwon Jae-ho. His name came up in different contexts in Busan, the legitimate side, the import conglomerates and the construction holdings and the hospitality group. And the other side, which nobody named directly, but which informed the way people talked about him, the particular careful quality of those conversations. The dragon tattoo on his neck was practically famous. There were rumors about what the dragon meant. Old Busan money, old Busan alliances, the kind of history that didn't get written in any official record. His wife had died 14 months ago. Chioma had seen it on the news. Park Hyejin, 31, cancer. The photos had shown a beautiful woman. The photos had shown a husband whose face, even in the carefully managed press images, looked like someone had hollowed him from the inside. A 4-year-old who stopped speaking when his mother died, Chioma said quietly. 14 months of silence. Trauma-induced mutism, Jia said. Classic presentation. The caregivers probably spent 14 months trying to fix the silence instead of sitting inside it with him.
She paused.
That poor child. You should apply. They've gone through 30 people. Which means they're desperate. And desperation makes people reconsider their prejudices. Jia tilted her head. You have 6 weeks on your visa. You need this. I need a job. I don't know if I need this job. Chioma, you are the most qualified person who will apply for that position. You know that.
She did know that.
That was the problem with rejection. It didn't change the facts. It just made you doubt them. 18 million a month would clear my loans, she said, more to herself than to Jia. It would clear your loans, secure your visa, and... Don't say it. Put you in daily proximity to a man who is objectively...
Jia.
I'm just noting facts. Chioma sent the email to Professor Kwan's contact before she could think herself out of it. The response came in under 10 minutes. Asterisk interview, Thursday. 10 a.m. Kwan Estate, Yongodong. Miss Johnson, come prepared. The child is not a case. He is a little boy who has been failed repeatedly. Come as yourself, not as a professional. Asterisk. She read that last line 3 times. Come as yourself. She looked at the plant on her windowsill, at the encre print above her desk, at the stack of textbooks and the rejection emails still sitting in her trash folder. She had 6 weeks and 1 interview. She had survived worse. The Kwan estate sat above Yongodong like it had always been there and always would be. Older than the buildings around it, stone walls darkened by decades of salt air from a harbor below, iron gates that didn't creak because old money oiled its hinges. Chioma stood outside those gates at 9:52 a.m. in Jia's best blazer and her own good trousers and the earrings her grandmother had given her, small gold loops that she wore when she needed courage. Her grandmother had said gold remembers where it comes from. Chioma needed something that remembered. Her phone buzzed. Her mother. Asterisk my daughter. Stand tall. Smile. Remember you are an Igbo woman from Lagos, and there is no gate in this world made for people like us to stand outside of. Asterisk. Chioma smiled despite herself. Press the intercom. Chioma Johnson. 10 o'clock appointment. The gates opened. The inside of the estate was not what she expected. She had braced for the cold museum quality of extreme wealth. White walls, untouchable surfaces, the feeling of a place that existed to be looked at rather than lived in. What she found instead was a house that was heavy with presence, with history, with a particular atmosphere of somewhere that had held both great happiness and great grief, and hadn't quite recovered from either. Portraits lined the main corridor. Family photographs. A wedding portrait, Jaeho younger, a woman beside him with a bright, direct smile. A small boy on a beach, mid-laugh, sand on his face. The photographs stopped approximately 14 months ago. After that, just empty wall space where frames had clearly been removed. A housekeeper led her to a sitting room where 2 women waited. The older one was perhaps 65, straight-backed, her gray hair swept up, wearing the kind of understated elegance that meant old family. The younger one, early 30s, designer-dressed and cool-eyed, had the expression of someone who had already made up her mind. Miss Johnson. The older woman indicated a chair. I am Kwan Haesuk. This is my daughter, Kwan Myri. It's an honor, Chioma said, settling into the chair with her back straight.
Come.
She had interviewed in harder rooms. Myri looked at her the way certain people look at things they didn't expect to see where they are.
Not hostile, exactly.
More like suspicious of a surprise. Professor Kwan's recommendation was unexpected. I'm told Professor Kwan doesn't make recommendations lightly. She doesn't. Haesuk's eyes were sharp and warm at once, the combination of someone who had been reading people accurately for 6 decades. Tell me about your background. Chioma told it plainly. Lagos to London for her undergraduate, back to Lagos for her master's, field placements in post-conflict zones in West Africa, crisis intervention with displaced children, then 3 years in Korea. Her research on nonverbal communication in traumatized children. Her language skills, Igbo, English, and functional Korean, still a work in progress with the reading. 30 caregivers, Myri said. Not one of them succeeded. Why would you be different? Because they weren't doing what I do. She said it without sharpness.
As a fact.
They were managing behavior. I work with grief. There's a difference. He's 4 years old. Grief doesn't check ages. Haesuk leaned forward slightly. What do you know about his situation? His mother died 14 months ago. He stopped speaking immediately after. The silence isn't defiance, it's protection. He's built a wall because every adult in his world right now is either grieving or trying to manage him, and neither of those things feels safe to a 4-year-old who has lost the one person who made the world make sense.
She paused.
The caregivers before me almost certainly tried to push through the wall. Incentives, techniques, structured interaction. He rejected all of it because it felt like pressure, and pressure to a grieving child feels like abandonment wearing a different coat. The room was quiet. My father died when I was 7, Chioma said. I stopped speaking for 2 months. Not because I couldn't, because words felt wrong. Because the world where words worked was the world where my father was alive, and that world was gone. She looked at Haesuk directly. Your grandson doesn't need someone who can fix him. He needs someone who already knows what's inside the silence. Haesuk was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "Can you start Monday?" Myri made a sharp sound. "Mother, we should discuss." Myri. She's a foreigner. Jaeho's reputation in this city is. Saiwa hasn't laughed in 14 months. Haesuk's voice was final. His reputation can absorb a competent nanny. His childhood cannot absorb another failure. She looked at Chioma. "Monday. Mr. Pak will send you the contract today. The salary is as posted. Housing is in the East Wing. Separate entrance." "Thank you, Haesuknim." "Don't thank me yet. Meet Jaeho first." She met him that afternoon. He came into the sitting room like he filled it, not loudly, not with performance, but with the particular gravitational quality of someone who is always the most dangerous thing in any given space and had stopped pretending otherwise. 6'1", charcoal suit, the dragon tattoo visible above his collar, its head below his jaw, scales coiling down the side of his neck, rendered in ink so fine it looked like it had grown there rather than been placed. He looked at her the way she imagined he looked at everything, assessing, precise, revealing nothing. "Miss Johnson." "Mr. Kwan." He didn't sit. She noticed he wasn't a man who sat in rooms where he felt uncertain. "I'll be direct," he said. "I don't think you'll succeed. Your mother thinks differently. My mother is optimistic. I deal in probabilities." He clasped his hands behind his back. 30 professionals. Trained, experienced, patient people. He wore every one of them down. He wasn't wearing them down, Chioma said. He was testing them. He was testing whether they would leave. And they all did. Something shifted fractionally in Jaeho's expression. "Not much. Enough. What would you do differently?" "I wouldn't try to reach him. I would just be present. Consistently. Quietly present. I would let him set the pace entirely.
I would not ask him to speak.
I would not reward silence or punish it. I would simply exist in his space until he decided I was safe. That could take months. It could. I'm paying for results." "You're paying for my expertise," she said calmly. "My expertise says that rushing a grieving child produces one result, more damage. If you want fast, hire someone else. You've seen how fast works." She met his eyes. "I'm offering something different." Another long pause. The dragon on his neck was level with her eye line. She didn't look away from his face. "If you hurt my son," he said quietly, not loudly, not with performance,
Just as a fact.
"in any way, even accidentally, I will ensure that you regret it. Am I understood?" She held his gaze. "Mr. Kwan, I don't break. I was raised by a woman who taught me that the things that try to break us are just testing how much we're worth. Your son will learn the same thing." She paused. "Am I understood?" The silence stretched. Then, so small she almost missed it, something moved at the corner of his mouth. Not quite a smile. Just the ghost of one, quickly gone.
"Monday," he said, and left.
Saiwa's playroom looked like the aftermath of something. Toy cars without wheels. Books with pages torn out and stacked neatly in the corner. Torn out, then neatly stacked, which told her something important. Crayon murals across the lower third of 2 walls. Curtains pulled down and folded, almost carefully, in the corner. A large stuffed tiger with one ear missing, sitting upright in the center of the room, as though placed there deliberately. And in the middle of it all, sitting cross-legged on the floor with a set of wooden blocks, was Kwan Saiwu. He was small. Smaller than she expected from the way everyone talked about him. His hair needed cutting. His socks didn't match, one blue, one white with a yellow stripe. He was wearing his shirt inside out. His face, when he looked up at her, was the most serious face she had ever seen on a 4-year-old, and she had worked with 4-year-olds on 3 continents. He stared at her. She looked back at him. Then she walked across the room, sat down on the floor about 6 feet away from him, and opened her bag. She pulled out a small portable speaker.
Connected her phone.
Music filled the room, soft, slow, an Afrobeats instrumental, the kind H. She said nothing. She pulled out a small notebook and began to write, not observing him, just writing. Letters she owed. things she needed to think through. She let him exist in her peripheral vision and gave him nothing to react to, nothing to push against. 4 minutes passed. Then 5. She could feel him watching her. She had worked with enough traumatized children to know exactly what was happening. He was checking for the move, the approach, the technique. He was waiting for her to do what the others had done. Turn toward him, initiate, reach. She didn't. She turned a page in her notebook, wrote her grocery list in Igbo for no particular reason, hummed very softly along with the music. Her grandmother played on Sunday mornings. Saiwa's eyebrows came together slightly. At the 11-minute mark, she heard him shift. At 12 minutes, she felt something touch her knee. She looked down. A wooden block, blue, with the letter B on it. She looked up. Saiwu was standing 3 feet away, watching her face with an expression that was reading every micro-movement, every response. He had thrown it, or placed it. She couldn't tell yet. She picked it up, examined it seriously, turned it over. B, she said to no one in particular. That's a good letter. My grandmother's name starts with B. Beatrice. Everyone called her Mama B. She set the block down beside her. She used to say the letter B looked like a person carrying 2 bags, one on each side. To balance them. Saiwa said nothing, but he didn't move away. She picked up her notebook again. 2 minutes later, another block landed near her foot.
Red.
Letter R. She picked it up. My name starts with a different letter, but I know someone named Remy. She was my best friend in primary school. She could do a cartwheel with her eyes closed. She said it beside the B. Nobody believed her until she did it in front of the whole assembly. She broke her wrist, but she did it. She heard the tiniest sound, not a word, not quite a laugh, somewhere in between. She did not look up. She kept writing. The blocks came one at a time, slowly, until there were 7 of them in a line beside her knee. She named something for each letter. She kept her voice easy and unhurried. She did not ask questions. She did not invite a response. She simply talked, the way her grandmother had talked, the way someone talks when they are comfortable and undemanding and simply filling a space with warmth. At the 32nd minute, she felt the weight. He had sat down, right beside her, so close she could hear him breathing. His shoulder was almost touching her arm. She turned a page in her notebook. Your tiger, she said, nodding toward the stuffed animal in the center of the room. He's missing his ear. A pause. My uncle had a dog missing a leg, she said. His name was General. My uncle said General lost his leg fighting the neighborhood bully and won. He walked with a limp, but he ran the whole street. She glanced down at the blocks. Animals with missing parts are usually the bravest ones. She felt Saiwa shift. Then, so quietly, she had to hold herself very still to be sure she heard it. Tiger lost his ear protecting me. 14 months. Chioma kept her voice perfectly level, perfectly soft, perfectly casual, like what had just happened was normal and expected and fine, because she knew that if she reacted, if she turned and made his words a moment, he would shut the door again. That makes sense, she said. Good tigers do that. Silence. Protecting people is the most important job, she added. She looked down at the blocks. What's his name? Another pause. Longer. She waited. Deho. Deho, she repeated, as if considering whether it suited him. That's a strong name for a one-eared tiger. I think it fits. She felt Saiwa look up at her. She kept her eyes on the notebook. Then he reached over, picked up the red R block, and placed it very precisely at the end of the line. She understood what he was doing. She didn't say so. She just let him. The first week was about presents. Chioma arrived at the same time every morning. She greeted Saiwa the same way, not with performance, not with a question, just a simple acknowledgement. Asterisk, good morning, Saiwa. Deho's looking well today. Asterisk, then she would settle into the room and exist and wait for him to come to her, which he always did, a little sooner each day. The second week, he started sitting beside her at meals. He didn't speak at the table, but he watched her eat with the focused interest of someone cataloging a new type of creature, and on the 4th day, he pushed half his rice toward her plate without explanation or eye contact. She accepted it without comment. Ate it. Said, "The cook here makes better rice than anyone I know except my grandmother." She saw his mouth twitch. The third week he started speaking, not constantly, not freely. Small words, specific to specific moments. Daeho wants to come outside, pointing at his tiger. She took it to mean Saiwa wanted to come outside. She brought a blanket to the garden, and they sat in the weak winter sun while she told him about Lagos. The color and the noise and the way the ocean looked different there, heavier and brighter at the same time. He listened with the total, unperformed attention that only children and very wise adults can manage. By the fourth week, he was asking questions. Is Lagos near here? Do tigers live in Lagos? Did your mama make food? What did she make? Can you make it? The cook, Mrs. Bay, initially territorial about her kitchen, softened entirely the morning she walked in to find Chioma teaching Saiwa how to stir a pot of egusi soup. Saiwu on a step stool, tongue between his teeth in concentration, stirring counterclockwise because Chioma had told him that was the direction that brought good luck, and he had chosen to believe her. He's never been in this kitchen before, Mrs. Bay told Haesuk later. I know, Haesuk said. He asked me this morning if I knew what stockfish was. Haesuk smiled into her tea. Mairi did not smile. Mairi watched the changes with the expression of someone who had been waiting for something to go wrong long enough that the something not going wrong had itself become suspicious. He calls her Uni, she told Jaeho during one of his rare, early evenings. Big sister. Your son calls a Nigerian stranger Uni. Jaeho was looking at a document. He didn't look up. He didn't call anyone anything for 14 months. I'll take Uni. Jaeho. He ate a full meal yesterday. He slept through the night for the first time since Hyojin he stopped. Since last year. He set down the document. Mairi, what exactly is it you're protecting us from? She didn't answer. Because from where I'm sitting, he said, the only thing protecting my son right now is her. What Jaeho did not tell his sister was that he had been watching. Not conspicuously, not deliberately, at first. He would pass the garden and there they would be. Saiwa tending to the small patch of ground Chioma had convinced the gardener to let them use. Chioma crouched beside him talking about something that made him nod with total seriousness. He would come in from late meetings to find them in the sitting room. Chioma reading aloud in that voice she had, warm and even and layered with something he could only describe as presence, while Saiwa leaned against her with Daeho the tiger held in both hands. He would stop in the corridor. Stand there longer than was necessary. Walk away. He told himself he was monitoring, ensuring the placement was appropriate. This was professionally reasonable. He was lying to himself, and he was self-aware enough to know it. The truth was simpler. Chioma Johnson was the first person in 14 months to make his house feel like a home instead of a monument to absence. She laughed at things genuinely, the kind of laugh that wasn't performing itself. She argued with Mrs. Bay about kitchen access with a cheerful persistence that somehow won rather than alienated. She was learning more Korean, practicing on Saiwu, who had appointed himself her teacher and corrected her pronunciation with the authority of someone very experienced in being four. And she had done something that Jaeho had not managed in 14 months. She had made his son a morning person. Saiwa now woke up before his alarm and came down to the kitchen in his mismatched socks to see if Chioma was already there. He usually was. The morning Jaeho came downstairs at 6:45 to find them both asleep on the kitchen floor, Saiwa tucked against Chioma's side, Daeho the tiger between them, surrounded by the evidence of a drawing session that had apparently lasted until they both ran out of energy. He stood in the doorway for a very long time. The feeling in his chest was something he hadn't felt in so long he had almost forgotten what to call it. He called it, Saiwu is going to be okay. And underneath that, quieter and more complicated, I don't know what I'm going to do about this woman. It was a Thursday evening, mid-spring, when Saiwa said it. They were at dinner. Jaeho had made a point of coming home before 8, a new habit forming slowly over the past weeks. Saiwu was telling an elaborate story about what Daeho the tiger had apparently done to one of the garden birds that morning, a story that had no clear ending and did not require one, and Jaeho was listening with genuine attention, and Chioma was trying not to laugh at the tiger's increasingly improbable adventures. "Appa," Saiwa said, "why do you look at Chioma-uni like that?" Jaeho became very still. "Like what?" he said carefully. "Like you do." Saiwa frowned, searching for the vocabulary. "Like in cartoons, when the person sees the other person and everything goes sparkly." Mrs. Bay, at the serving counter, turned away very suddenly. Chioma took a long sip of water. "Eat your vegetables, Saiwu," Jaeho said. Saiwu ate his vegetables, but he looked between them with the satisfied expression of someone who had just confirmed a hypothesis. That night, after Chioma had put Saiwu to bed, after the story, after the negotiation about whether the story needed to happen 3 or 5 or 7 times, after the small warm ritual of good night, Daeho, she came down to find Jaeho on the back terrace. He had his jacket off. His arms rested on the railing. The city below glimmered, the harbor beyond its silver black. The dragon on his neck was fully visible in profile, caught in the ambient light. He heard her come out and didn't turn around. "He asked for the same story 7 times, she said. "Did he get it?" "He got it 4 times, and then I told him tigers need sleep too, and that seemed to satisfy him." She came to stand beside him at the railing, a careful foot of distance between them. "How was the meeting?" "Long." He looked at the city. "Good," eventually. A pause. "You've been here 2 months." "I have." He talks more now than he did in the last 14 months combined. He has things to say. Jaeho turned to look at her. In the terrace light, she met his gaze and didn't look away because she had learned that looking away made things worse, made the unspoken things press harder. "I want to say something," he said. "And I want to say it plainly because I am not someone who is," he paused. "I am better with action than with words. I've noticed. You are extraordinarily good at what you do." He looked back at the harbor. "When I hired you, I thought it was a professional arrangement. I was wrong. What you've done for Saiwu," his jaw tightened. "I don't have a word for what that is. I don't have a way to." "Mr. Kwan." "Jaeho." He said it firmly. "At least out here." She was quiet for a moment. "Jaeho." Something moved in his expression. "I want you to know," he said carefully, "that whatever has been," he stopped, started again. "I am aware of the position. Employer and employee. I am not a man who... I would not want you to feel that your job was conditional on anything other than the work." She looked at him. "Are you trying to tell me that you would never put me in an uncomfortable position? Or are you trying to tell me something else entirely and struggling to do it?" A pause. Then, unexpectedly, he let out a breath that was almost a laugh. The second one. "I thought so." The harbor made its sounds below them. Somewhere in the house, a clock struck 10. "I am scared," she said quietly. Not an admission she'd planned to make. Just true. Not of you, specifically. Of this. Because this place is the first place in Korea that has felt like somewhere I'm supposed to be, and I am aware that could stop being true if I am not careful. "I know," he said. "And I am very good at my job, and I would like to remain very good at my job without." "I know. So I think," she said, looking at him steadily, "that we should both know what is true, and we should both choose to be patient about it, and we should not do anything that makes Saiwa's life more complicated." Jaeho looked at her for a long moment. The dragon on his neck caught the light. "That's a reasonable framework," he said. "I have good frameworks." "You have excellent frameworks." Another almost laugh, this one warmer. "Good night, Chioma." "Good night, Jaeho." She went inside. He stayed on the terrace for another 20 minutes, looking at the city, feeling, for the first time in a very long time, like the future was something other than a thing to survive. Spring turned to summer. Saiwa started a small preschool program, 3 mornings a week. The first day, he held Daeho the tiger in a death grip all the way to the gate and then turned around and walked back to Chioma and pressed his face into her side. She crouched down. "You know what Daeho needs?" she said. He shook his head. "He needs to see the classroom. Tigers are curious." If you don't show him, he'll wonder about it all day and won't be able to sleep tonight. Saiwoo considered this seriously. Then he turned back toward the gate, tiger raised slightly so Daeho could see. He looked back once at the door.
Chioma waved. Go on. He went.
At pickup, he ran out and immediately began telling her at high volume about a boy named Jiho who could do a puzzle in 2 minutes and a teacher who had a fish tank and a green crayon that was the exact right color of the Lagos grass she'd told him about. There are no green crayons like that here, he said authoritatively. We need to go to Lagos. You want to go to Lagos? Daeho wants to see the ocean. She looked at the tiger. Daeho is very well traveled for a one-eared tiger. Saiwoo grinned, a wide, bright, full-face grin that she felt in her chest like something had been unlocked. That evening she found Daeho standing in the hallway outside Saiwoo's room, door slightly open, listening to the boy tell Daeho the tiger a completely fabricated account of the day's events in which Saiwoo himself had apparently solved the 2-minute puzzle in 90 seconds. She stood beside Daeho in the hallway, not speaking, just listening. After a moment he said, very quietly, he used to tell his mother about his days. I know. She would ask him every night. Asterisk, what was the best thing that happened? What was the hardest thing? What do you want to dream about tonight? Asterisk. Chioma was still. He stopped being able to answer those questions, Daeho said. For 14 months. He looked at the cracked door. Listen to him. Inside, Saiwoo had moved on from the puzzle to a detailed breakdown of the fish tank and which fish he planned to name. His mother would have loved this, Daeho said. It was said simply, not with the raw, bleeding quality grief sometimes had. With something gentler, the particular piece of someone who has started to let a loved one live in memory instead of loss. She sounds like she was extraordinary, Chioma said. She was. A pause. She told me once, near the end, she said, asterisk, don't let him grow up thinking love is a finite thing. Don't let him think it ends. Asterisk, he looked at Chioma. I didn't know how to give him that. I thought it was something I had to manufacture. Something I had to engineer. A beat. Then you walked in and just, asterisk, were it. Asterisk. She looked at him. You just showed him, he said. Without trying to. I just knew what he needed. Because someone showed me once, when I needed it. They stood in the hallway for a moment longer, the small voice still flowing through the cracked door, the city quiet outside. Then Daeho reached over, very slowly, and took her hand. She looked down at it. His hand was large, certain, the dragon tattoo visible on the back of his wrist where it coiled toward his knuckles. She didn't pull away. The weeks that followed were a careful, deliberate, unhurried thing. It was not a dramatic falling in love, not for two people who had both learned the cost of moving too fast through things that mattered. It was small, meals that went longer than they needed to, because neither wanted to be the one to leave the table. Evenings on the terrace, with the city below them talking about things that had nothing and everything to do with how they actually felt. Notes. She left Igbo words on the kitchen counter sometimes, with translations. He left the meanings of the dragon scales once on a slip of paper she found on her doorstep, written in precise handwriting, each scale meaning something different. Protection, memory, endurance, loyalty, new beginnings. She kept the paper. Saiwoo, who had the observational gifts of a child with nothing to do but pay attention, noticed all of it and catalogued it and occasionally reported his findings to Daeho at high volume without regard for who might be within earshot. Mairi called a family meeting in August. Daeho sat at the head of the table. His mother poured tea. Mairi delivered her concerns in the precise, structured language of someone who had rehearsed this. She has too much influence. Saiwoo is becoming attached in ways that are. She's the reason my son is happy, Daeho said. People will say. Let them say it. It isn't traditional. Mairi. He looked at his sister. Not coldly. Steadily. Hyojin wasn't traditional. Our family wasn't anyone's definition of traditional. What we are is real. He set down his cup. I'm not. You are. He said it gently. And I understand it. Change is frightening. But Saiwoo is not frightened anymore. And I am not frightened anymore. And I think if you spent 10 minutes with her without your guard up, you wouldn't be either. Myri was quiet.
Haesuk poured herself more tea.
She taught me a proverb last week, she said mildly.
Ibo.
Ani wethera aji wetherendu. The one who brings cola, nut brings life. She set down the teapot. That is what she brought to this house. Life. She looked at Myri. I will not protect reputation at the expense of life. Chioma is real. What she's done for this family is real. And I will not allow discomfort with the unfamiliar too. The proposal happened in September, in the kitchen on a Sunday morning. There was no plan. Jaeho was not a man who lacked the capacity to plan. He had planned more consequential things than this with considerable precision. But this was not a thing that arrived with a plan. It arrived with flour on his shirt and Saiwo on the counter and Chioma trying to teach them both how to make chin-chin, a Nigerian snack that she had been promising to make for 3 weeks and was making now because Saiwo had woken up at 6 and decided today was the day. The kitchen smelled of cardamom and frying oil and warm dough. Saiwo had flour in his hair. Chioma was laughing at something Jaeho had just said, a real laugh, the one that wasn't performing anything, and the morning light was coming through the window at the angle that made the kitchen gold. Jaeho looked at her, at the flour on her hands, at the laugh still finishing on her face, at his son next to her on the counter with his tongue between his teeth pressing shapes into dough with the seriousness of a surgeon. He said, "Marry me." Chioma's hands went still. The kitchen went quiet except for the oil. Saiwo looked up. "I mean it," Jaeho said. Not loudly. Not with ceremony. Just as one of the truest things he'd ever said. I know I haven't, I should probably do this differently. Better. With a ring and a speech and... Appa has a ring, Saiwo said helpfully. I know where it is. Jaeho looked at his son. We'll discuss the concept of privacy later. Chioma's eyes were bright. She looked at Saiwo. Did you know about this? Saiwo considered his diplomatic options carefully. I know where the ring is. She looked at Jaeho. He held her gaze, not with the control and precision of the man who had told her he would destroy her if she hurt his son, but with something open and undefended that she understood was not easily offered. I love you, he said simply. I love who you are. I love who you let Saiwo be. I love who I am in this kitchen right now. He didn't move toward her. He gave her the space to choose. Marry me. She looked at the flour on her hands. She looked at Saiwo, who was holding his breath in a way that was only possible for someone very emotionally invested in a Sunday morning proposal. She looked at Jaeho. You still owe me 3 months advance notice on international travel with Saiwo, she said. He blinked. That's your condition? That, and we're going to Lagos for a month. He needs to see the ocean. We can go to Lagos. And I need a proper ring. I have one. I know. Saiwo told me where it is 3 weeks ago. A beat. Then he laughed, a real laugh, full, unguarded, the kind of laugh that had been waiting a long time to happen. Saiwo laughed too, dropping his dough and throwing his arms up. Chioma was smiling through eyes that were doing something warm and complicated. Yes, she said. Obviously yes. The wedding was in October. Small. Garden of the estate. Autumn light. The harbor visible in the distance. Haesuk cried with the controlled dignity of a woman who had waited a long time for reasons to cry with happiness. Mrs. Bay made enough food for 3 times the guest list. The gardener, who had watched Saiwo and Chioma tend the garden patch all spring and summer, cut flowers from it for the centerpieces. Myri came. She wore a blue dress and stayed close to the edges of things, but near the end of the reception, after the speeches and the dancing, she found Chioma by the garden. She said simply, he's different. Chioma waited. Saiwo. He's. Myri searched for the word. He's my brother's son. He has Hyojin's eyes. And when I look at him now, she stopped. When I look at him now, he looks alive again. She looked at Chioma. I was wrong to be afraid of you. You were protecting your family, Chioma said. I understand that. I was protecting an idea of my family. That's different. Myri picked up her glass. Thank you. For him. For Jaeho. A beat. Welcome to the family. It was not a large gesture, but it was a true one. A Across the garden, Saiwoo was dancing, an entirely self-invented dance with no relationship to the music playing, holding Daeho the tiger aloft like a flag. Jaeho was watching him from the edge of the dance floor, and when he saw Chioma look at him, he came to her. "What did she say?" he asked. "That Saiwoo looks alive again." He looked at his son. At the dancing. At the one-eared tiger raised above the 4-year-old's head like a victory banner. "He does," Jaeho said.
He took her hand.
She leaned against his shoulder and watched Saiwa dance in the October light and thought about her grandmother's carved wooden elephant, about the proverb, "The one who brings cola, nut brings life," about 30 nannies who had come and failed and left, and about a 4-year-old boy who had not been impossible, who had never been impossible, who had simply been waiting for someone who understood that grief is not a problem to be solved. It is a room you sit inside with someone you trust, until one day, together you find the door. If this story moved you, follow for more stories about love that crosses every border the world tries to put between people.